wrote real quickly, "Hi, Jim. Thanks for taking the time to read this. My question is about the legendary AWA World Champion Nick Bockwinkel. I've often wondered how Nick Bockwinkel would have fit in with Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen in the NWA. I don't know how well he would have fit in with the Horsemen off camera, but I think he might have fit in with them quite nicely on camera. I know that Nick was sort of at the end of his career in the 1980s when Rick and the Horsemen were in their prime, but I've always felt that if Nick would have been younger at that time, he might have been a great addition to the Horsemen, and it might have been an interesting storyline to see Bockwinkel and Flair get into a feud over who should be the leader of the Horsemen. So my question to you is, how do you think Nick Bockwinkel would have fit in with the Horsemen if he were a few years younger in the mid and late 80s, or even at the age he was at that time? Thanks again." And that's kind of interesting. Work-wise, there's no doubt that Nick was at a level of actually, and we've talked about this before, his work was better technically than Flair's. And so Nick was at the Horseman level as a worker or above it. He's definitely every bit as good as Tully, and I don't think Arn would have an issue that he was so different, though. It's not a comparison you could make easily and say, as a fan sitting back and say so-and-so is better than so-and-so. But inside the business with guys who know what it is to truly be a worker, would any of the Horsemen have said they were better than Bockwinkel?
Only Wyndham, maybe.
Okay, and then even then, athletically as a worker, Barry was better than the Nick Bockwinkel that we all got to see because he was in his 40s by the time of even film or, whatever still exists. But Barry would know that he wasn't as smart a worker maybe as Bockwinkel.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Psychology and just because of the 30 years of experience, Nick had fucking been wrestling since before Barry had been alive.
Had Nick ever worked the Carolinas?
Yes, he was there. I know I remember seeing him on some cards advertised, and I at some point I think, not often, but I would think he would have been on something for some reason. Maybe now you're making me doubt myself as I've said that out loud.
Because that's one of the things I was thinking when you're talking about him as a worker. Undoubtedly one of the best workers of his time, and his time lasted longer than most people, into his 50s. But do you think it's just as simple as you could take that and put it in the Carolinas and he would have worked?
Well, the Carolinas, after the re-education process in mid-'70s with George Scott bringing in Johnny Valentine and Wahoo and changing from a kind of a southern tag team territory where the tag teams were the big names and you really didn't have a lot of big national names as regulars, to a territory where it was a singles territory and there were national names involved, and that goosed it, right? We all know that. As far as that, since that time, the Carolinas, the guys that were featured on top and got over, either had to have tremendous charisma a la Dusty, or it was really built on great work because they had the best in-ring fucking performers. And a lot of them there, almost every roster they had, it was a workers' territory. And so, yeah, I think Bockwinkel, the way he could talk and the way he could work, if he'd ever had to leave Minneapolis, which he never did because they used him on top for 15 years and he liked it there and he liked the schedule. But if he spent time in any other territory, he could have gotten over up until, really almost when he retired. Yeah. The way he was performing in Memphis in 82, 83, 84, he could have gotten over in any territory. And he retired 3 years later. So, but anyway, nevertheless, here's the thing. So talent-wise, yes. In ring, yes. But Nick's personality was more to JJ than it was one of the Horsemen. Nick would have had to have been, even when he was younger, because everybody knows he was a pro for years. But as far as being a real main event talent in multiple territories, it was really till the late 60s. And maybe when he had the run in Georgia that he was a babyface top guy in his 30s. But then he had that incredible run as a heel. But his personality was more the one that would have kept the other horsemen out of trouble in the bar, rather than, which was JJ's job, right? It didn't fit with the horsemen because, and also Nick was not a noted pussy hound and was not going to cut a promo where he was going to tell all the girls and mean it in Philadelphia that he was going to be at the Airport Marriott bar immediately after the show. Don't bring your boyfriends, which was an exact quote that fucking Flair said. I was standing in front of him when we did the local promos for fucking Philly. And I'm not saying personality that Nick was boring. Nick was just you try to explain it, Brian. Nick was a completely different personality than any of those guys. And that's one of the reasons why Ole was kind of like the odd guy. And then all of a sudden here came Wyndham or Luger, and okay, you could buy this because Ole wasn't out drinking and looking for pussy. But since he had the elder statesman status, it worked. But all the horsemen were remembered as the guys that were either pussy magnets or, in the case of maybe Tully, pussy hound. No, I'm playing Tully. And out at the bars and riding in limos and shit, and you had to fit that not only in the ring but out of the ring. Yay? Nay?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, because let's say hypothetically they did something where they push Flair out and Bockwinkel takes over the Horsemen. He's the leader of the Horsemen now, because it's hard for him not to be in that leader role.
Yeah, and
then the Horsemen go from being the Marriott bar to the Harvard Club and the Yale Club.
Oh, that would have been perfect for Arn Anderson. He said, yeah, I went up to Yale, and then I went to Eton because I was hungry. No,
We recently said on the Super Podcast, it's funny, whenever someone posts something about Nick Bockwinkel on Facebook or something, you'll get 20 people who jump up and they'll say, class, pure class, the classiest man ever. It's an automatic thing, a meme. People just jump to it.
Yeah.
So you'd be applying that to the Horseman. Maybe he comes in before he loses the belt to Hennig. Maybe he comes in as the AWA champion. And now you have Flair with the belt. You have Bockwinkel with the belt. They're both in their suits. They both look good. They get along. And you slowly build to Bockwinkel pushing Flair out. And Bockwinkel ends up with his best friends and his manager and the Horseman. And then you get babyface Flair, which quite frankly, maybe what the fans wanted just wasn't what Ric Flair wanted.
Well, yeah, but I don't think it's what Dusty wanted. I wouldn't have wanted that either because my checks would have been lower. I'm just telling you. No, and I love Nick Bockwinkel, but I mean, while that is something that we can look back and say, wow, that may have been cool at the time, that would have derailed that train. It wasn't at that point, the Horsemen, the reason why they wanted all really the Horsemen babyface, except maybe for JJ, the ones that liked the Horsemen and the guys that wanted to dress up like them. And that was another thing Ole was good for earlier was at least keeping the Horsemen some heat on them, because who would like that fucking crusty old bastard? But when they got cool, if any of them, if even Flair had switched babyface, then he would have stopped being cool because they were the bad guys. And I know people can try to go back and want to rebook it or see, well, what if? The only what if to me is I wish Tully and Arn hadn't have fucking left. Otherwise, I think they did what they had to do when they changed the members. But otherwise, Tully and Arn and Flair, they needed to be fucking together as long as they could be.
If there was no Wyndham, who would you put in that fourth spot in '88?
Oh, God. Now I got to remember the entire roster off the top of my head. I almost think you kind of, I think the one thing you didn't do was put somebody in that didn't need to be there, rather than don't fill it until you've got somebody that it should fill it. And that's probably not what would have happened. They probably would have just filled it.
Who else ran with them that would have fit in terms of behind the scenes? Who else was drinking with them the most that wasn't an official member?
Jesus Christ, I don't know if anybody was. JJ would probably know better than me who was accompanying them on a nightly basis, but I don't know if anybody was keeping up with them. It might, and that's the thing is that kind of organically grew out of those guys just coming out and doing a promo, but also hanging out together and just having the personal relationship. That's why it worked. and you couldn't just, you know, but then it becomes, you know, Jimmy Garvin becomes a free bird.
That's a great way to look at it.
That was almost a nice segue for our goddamn program here. But anyway, but yes, I think Nick would have worked with the Horsemen in the ring. Yes, he was every bit as talented, but it just wasn't the same flavor, and it wasn't. You would know that it wasn't a legitimate. It would come off. It wasn't a legitimate personal relationship, and that's the way it just fucking grew. And I think, you know, when you've got something like that people just want to get over, don't fuck with Stone Cold Steve Austin either. When the people want it that bad, just kind of go with it. And then actually, when you go with it, you're already into it by the time you realize it's going to be a fucking big thing. So don't fuck with shit that's